If you've ever tried to build the perfect compost bin, start a vermicompost system, or simply lure worms for fishing, you know one thing. Not all bait is created equal. You can pile leaves, kitchen scraps, or garden clippings into a bin, and worms may nibble at a few pieces, but the system never seems to thrive. Yet history and modern research both point to two surprisingly common substances that worms cannot resist. Substances so simple that almost everyone overlooks them. For the first minute of this guide, think about how farmers and gardeners from the past up to today have manipulated these natural attractants to produce richer soil, faster worm reproduction, and healthier ecosystems. Whether you are a beginner starting your first worm bin or a seasoned gardener looking to boost your yield, understanding these two irresistible baits can completely change your results. Worms are naturally drawn to fermented food, and it's easier to use than you think. One of the most powerful attractants for worms is fermentation. For centuries, gardeners observed that scraps left to ferment, like old fruit, vegetable peels and grains, seemed to call worms out of the soil in droves. What they didn't realize at first is that fermentation produces a range of compounds, particularly acids, alcohols, and sugars, that stimulate the worm's olfactory senses. Worms detect these compounds through their skin and specialized chemoreceptors in the soil. Essentially, fermented material signals a rich, easy-to-digest food source. In practical terms, applying this knowledge is simple. Instead of dumping fresh fruit scraps directly into your worm bin, allow them to ferment for a day or two. Even slightly overripe bananas or peels from apples work perfectly. Chop them into small pieces to increase surface area, accelerate fermentation, and make it easier for worms to process. In a backyard system, this can lead to noticeably higher worm activity within hours. Worms not only feed more aggressively, but the overall composting process speeds up, because fermented material is more bioavailable than fresh scraps. The second powerful bait is protein. While worms can digest plant matter effectively, introducing a moderate amount of protein into their environment causes an almost immediate response. Historical compost studies from the 20th century show that adding protein sources like fish scraps, eggshells, and even powdered milk encourages worms to aggregate in those areas. Protein is essential for worm growth and reproduction, particularly for breeding populations in vermiculture systems. It also increases the nutritional quality of worm castings, which directly benefits soil fertility. Applying this in your system is straightforward, but it does require a bit of care. Eggshells should be crushed to increase digestibility, while meat or fish scraps should be used sparingly to prevent odours and pests. A small pinch, mixed with fermented fruit or vegetable matter, can create an irresistible bait station inside your worm bin. Over time, worms will focus on these nutrient-rich spots, reproduce more quickly, and produce castings with higher nitrogen content, which is, honestly, critical for soil health. The most successful gardeners and vermicomposters understand that these two baits are most effective when combined. Fermented matter signals worms that the food is abundant and easy to digest, while protein provides essential nutrients for growth and reproduction. A simple mix of overripe bananas and crushed eggshells, lightly moistened and placed in the bin, produces a level of worm activity that is dramatically higher than either component alone. For beginners, start with a small patch of your worm bin and monitor activity. You'll notice worms congregating almost immediately. Adjust proportions as needed based on population size. Experienced gardeners can use these bait techniques strategically, placing multiple feeding zones to distribute worms throughout the bin, prevent overcrowding, and accelerate compost turnover. Worms are sensitive to temperature, moisture, and light, but food choice remains a primary driver of activity. Historical studies and, even modern vermiculture practices show that consistent feeding with the kind of bait worms absolutely love leads to faster soil processing and, a healthier worm population. Observing how worms respond to bait zones actually allows you to fine-tune your system. Now, overfeeding can cause spoilage, while underfeeding, it slows growth. Using fermented fruit and protein as bait gives you a predictable, high-reward signal that worms respond to almost instinctively. To put this knowledge into practice, start by collecting your overripe fruit or vegetable scraps and protein sources. Chop and crush them, then just lightly moisten the mixture. Place small piles in strategic zones of your worm bin, making sure they're accessible but not buried under heavy bedding that could, slow worm movement. So, it's a good idea to observe worm behavior and make adjustments as needed. Just remember to repeat feeding at regular intervals to maintain their attraction and support healthy population growth. Now, for those of you who use worms for fishing, you can actually create small bait patches in soil or compost to farm worms. This makes collection both easy and sustainable, really. The key takeaway here is that small changes can yield massive results. Even as we look ahead to 2025, gardeners and survivalists alike can learn a great deal from historical practices and the natural behavior of worms. By using fermentation and protein as bait, you can attract worms efficiently, increase reproduction, and accelerate compost production. It's a simple, low-cost method that truly transforms ordinary scraps into a high-performance system. You see, understanding and applying these two baits is really the difference between a struggling bin and a thriving worm population. So, if you're keen on more practical, historically grounded techniques to get the most out of your worm bin and soil, do subscribe to Hydrohaven. Share this guide with fellow enthusiasts and keep discovering ways to work smarter with nature rather than against it.